Dear listeners, we are back once again with a story written by Ronald Burns. If you enjoyed Ronald's story, be sure to explore more of his works on Amazon. We've included links to his stories in the description box below, so you can easily dive into his captivating storytelling. Also, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell notification icon. Now let's get on with the story. Dating has no rational connection to marriage. Dating is 90% fun and 10% juggling work and real life. Marriage is exactly the opposite. If you think that paying the rent, driving the kids to school, and worrying about your sick wife's doctor's appointment is going to be as exciting as dating, most of the time you're dreaming mentally and emotionally. Dating is for kids and marriage is for adults. If you expect that every day or even every week that you're married will be a whirlwind of electrifying stimulation, then you're too stupid or immature to remain married. Having said all of that, I do find happiness, excitement, and stimulation in my marriage, just not every day or even every week. I think that an enduring marriage or love is not a blaze fed by gallons of gas, but a simmering fire constantly nurtured by small twigs. After a long marriage, however, my wife silently disagreed and wanted constant excitement, complete with fireworks. And that led to a disaster. I'm Steve. I met my future wife when I worked as a part-time lifeguard at our college swimming pool. I looked pretty good in a bathing suit. But that's not hard when you're 20 and surrounded by pretty girls in bathing suits. I was hard most of the time at the pool. Alexa was taking a swimming class and she had the most perfect breasts on campus. Trust me, I was an expert on the subject based on my non-stop observation in the field. It's a hobby I've never given up, though. I try not to be too obvious about it. She was single, and so was I. 2 years later, we were married. That was 30 years ago. And I'm still aroused by my wife's chest as well as the rest of her. My frequent compliments on her physique used to please her, but now she ignores them. Our love life had slowed down. Alexa was rarely in the mood over the past few years, but since September, it came to a tire-screeching halt. I didn't need to hire a private eye or follow Alexa, my wife of 30 years, to know she was cheating. I just knew from the way she looked at me, or rather looked through me, the way she wouldn't look me in the eye when I spoke. To her, it had all started after a Labor Day picnic at her sister June's house. My wife seemed enamored by June's college-aged brother-in-law Tommy. He was also a student at the college where Alex worked as a psychologist before Alex and I began dating in college. She dated a guy named Billy, who looked just like this kid. Billy constantly cheated on her with waitresses and eventually dumped her to run off with Surprise. Surprise, a waitress breaking Alexa's heart. I knew that she never got over Billy and kept a shoebox filled with photos of them together hidden in her closet. I always believed that she settled for me on the rebound from Billy. It's not like I look like a troll. On a scale of 1 to 10, we're both 7s or 8s. I'll be honest, I still reminisce sometimes about my junior high school girlfriend, who was my first love, and wonder whatever became of Mary. Or was her name Marie? Just because we all move forward in our lives doesn't mean we can't, on occasion, fondly remember the past, so long as we don't commit destructive acts because of the past and those desires, both fulfilled and unfulfilled. I suspected that sleeping with this guy was Alexa's way to sort of rewrite history and pretend that she was living happily ever after with Billy. I also think that being surrounded by interchangeable young people who didn't seem to age each year while she did age had a cumulative effect on her psyche. Deep within her subconscious, she was the only person in this universe getting older. Once in a while, she would cry on my shoulder about aging. She dyed the gray out of her hair and spent a considerable portion of her take-home pay on makeup and clothes better suited for a college co-ed. They still called co-eds. I'm a contract lawyer at a bank. My job is to take papers from the left side of my desk, read them, and if they're in order, sign them and put them on the right side of my desk. It's not exciting, but it put a roof over our heads and food on the table for 25 years. It also put 3 children through college and paid for years of my wife's therapy and antidepressant drugs. I'm 50, And look my age. I don't have as much hair as I used to. And what's left is white. I work out at the office gym 2 or 3 times a week and ride a bike for at least 20 members on weekends. And sometimes interbike races in the senior classification. So I'm in good shape for my age. I'm not 20 years old or have the stamina that I once had. But like Toby Keith saying, I'm as good once as I ever was. If you haven't listened to Toby Keith, you're really missing something special. My wife loves working with young people, perhaps too much. Over the years, I've occasionally wondered if she ever slept with some of the students, but I never had proof, or even much reason to suspect it. 1 or 2 late meetings a year didn't raise any red flags, but then Tommy came along and everything changed. Suddenly she had to attend late meetings and conferences. I'm not an idiot. Even though she began treating me like one I loathed, throwing away all of our years together, I hated the thought of telling our children what was going on. Most of all, I felt that admitting what was going on with my wife would make me a failure. Over the years, I had turned down promotions that would entail traveling because I didn't want to be away from my family. I always put my family before my career. And now, while I just felt like a fool with no clear path towards the future at my age, if my wife no longer wanted me, would any other woman want me? I hoped that this passion she had for him would burn out, or he would lose interest. But that wasn't happening. The time for reconciliation had passed by. I knew that I had to end this charade. I was going to end this marriage with a bang, not a whimper. I could have contacted any one of the dozen divorce lawyers I knew, but I researched divorce laws on my computer at work. I was careful to erase all tracks that might come back to bite me in my ass if I had to faint. Surprised that she was cheating. My wife was a creature of habit. She had 2 cups of strong black coffee from our capsule coffee maker every morning on an empty stomach because she was watching her weight. Recently, she ran errands or went shopping every Monday and Thursday mornings that took over 2 hours, and yet she never came home with purchases or packages. Her cell phone was now locked tighter than a medieval virgin's chastity belt. That was new. She had never before used a password with it. For the past month, she was never in the mood to be intimate with me. The new clothes and new hairdo were just more obvious signs. Perhaps I should have spoken to her about this. But I knew she would just lie to me, and that would hurt even more than any infidelity. If she wanted to end our 30 years together like this, well, I wouldn't stop her, but would instead make damn sure she paid an enormous price. As the Apostle Paul said, the wages of sin is death. I wasn't going to kill her, but I would make her believe that she was dying while in a state of sin, which for a girl educated in Catholic school and who regularly attended Mass would be an enormous psychological burden. Before I brought down hell on her, I tried one last time to see if our marriage could be salvaged. I suggested a week-long trip to Hawaii to renew our relationship, but she wasn't in the mood for a trip. That's when I knew my marriage was completely over. She couldn't stand to be away from her lover that long. That was the moment that a lifetime of love for her vanished, and my lifelong devotion to her disappeared. I had never once cheated on her, but now I had no reason to remain faithful. I decided that until the divorce was final, I wouldn't seek out another woman, but wouldn't run away from one. If she pursued me, I went on about our normal daily routine as if nothing was amiss. I kept my eyes open and planned my revenge. I have to make a confession. I can be a real jerk to someone who messes with me, and my wife was messing with me really bad. 30 years of love and devotion was quickly morphing into abject hatred. My suspicions were confirmed at Thanksgiving dinner, at her sister June's house. Tommy June's 20-year-old, tall, handsome brother-in-law was also there. I could see sparks flying from my wife's eyes every time she turned towards Tommy. Alexa spent the entire evening speaking to him. They sat next to each other and ignored the rest of us. She often rested her hand on his muscular arm as he spoke. She acted as though that his comment that it was very cold for November was more brilliant than Einstein's version of alphabet soup. June was embarrassed for her sister and tried to engage Tommy in conversation about his fiancée, who was dining at her grandparents' house with her divorced mother. But Alexa would have no part of it as she interrupted her sister. Her entire being was focused on Tommy and his exploits as a third-string blocker on his college football team. I interrupted their tete and asked Tommy about his post-graduation plans. He looked bewildered. He had not previously thought about anything more than a day away. I managed. My fiancé's divorced mother's sporting goods store. The money's good, so I'll just keep doing that. He replied. As we left, Alexa gave her sister and her brother-in-law a peck on the cheek, but Tommy's goodbye kiss was on his lips. Alexa pulled back from the kiss, worried that we saw it and might understand what was going on. But we all pretended to ignore it. June's husband looked proud of his brother's conquest while June was ashamed of her sister's behavior. I pretended not to have seen it. But it further resolved my desire for revenge. I had to be sure that Alexa's lover was Tommy, and only Tommy. For all I knew, she could have a bunch of different side pieces. Curiosity got the best of me. And one day I left early for work. I borrowed a coworker's car and returned to my block. When my wife left the garage, I followed her. My new mantra was, "Know thine enemy." I followed her to a Starbucks next to a middling hotel where she exited her car and met up with Tommy, her tall blonde and handsome boyfriend. I hated him. He wasn't made of money, and I knew that the Starbucks coffee alone, much less the hotel, was costing what? To him was a fortune, unless of course my wife was paying, which meant that I was paying. While some people use cannabis or cocaine to enhance sex, my wife used coffee. Coffee was my wife's only vice, that is, before adultery shoved it into a distant second place. You might be curious if the sun was shining or it was raining that day. I don't know. All I could see and comprehend was the love of my life betraying me and our marriage. I didn't storm in because that wouldn't accomplish what I wanted. She was already unfaithful, so there was no point in stopping this assignation since my marriage was dead and needed, only to be pushed into a ditch to be buried or perhaps into a fire to be cremated. I thought about the usual steps of draining our bank accounts and shutting her credit cards, but that didn't fit in with the plan bubbling up in my head. My plan required that I appear ignorant of her affair. My wife was a bit of a hypochondriac, and at least twice a year was convinced that she was having a heart attack, and I willingly and apprehensively drove her to the nearest hospital. Once she thought she was having an appendix attack even though her appendix had been removed years before. I never told you that she was a genius. Her addiction to coffee and adultery, as well as her hypochondria, would lead to her downfall. I decided I didn't want her publicly discovered. I wanted her and her lover to be publicly humiliated. I secretly bought caffeine powder for cash at a health food store across town. I also bought high-end Brazilian coffee, which has a high amount of caffeine. In addition, I purchased reusable capsules for our coffee machine and a coffee bean grinder so we could use this better coffee in the machine. My wife was ecstatic over this purchase, not realizing that these would be the tools of her reputation's destruction. On the Thursday after Thanksgiving, I put Operation Mock Heart Attack into action. I learned that you shouldn't consume more than 400 milligrams of caffeine, or you would have symptoms that mimic a heart attack or cardiac arrhythmias. I took all 5 coffee capsules and filled each of them with the normal 100 milliliters of extra strong Brazilian coffee. Then I added an additional 500 milligrams of pure caffeine powder. My wife drank her usual 2 cups on an empty stomach before she ran out of the door to her lover. She commented on how good the Brazilian coffee was. She had so much caffeine in her that she could have carried her car to him. I went straight to work, knowing that my wife would meet up with Tommy at the Starbucks next to the hotel and self-administer the coup de grace in the form of a coronary convincing cappuccino with its heart-thumping measure of additional caffeine. Subsequently, I would learn that an hour later, Tommy anonymously phoned 911 from the hotel room because Alexa believed she was having a heart attack as they made love and begged him to call. She also had him summon her priest so she could receive the last rites now that she had committed her last wrong. To his credit, He waited until the paramedics arrived before he ran away. The emergency workers arrived to find my naked wife writhing on the floor with stomach pain and palpitations of the heart, unable to catch her breath. Her pulse was off the charts, as was her blood pressure. An hour later, I was in the hospital watching my wife as she was hooked up to a heart monitor, and a priest was praying over her sobbing confession of a not-so-original sin. The doctors had come to the conclusion that this was no heart attack but merely too much sex with a young stud, fueled by too much coffee. I asked who brought her in, and I went down to the driveway to interview the ambulance driver. Reluctantly, he told me that he found my wife naked in a hotel room. I didn't return to the hospital room but drove straight to our bank and moved half of our savings into my name alone. Then I phoned a friend who was an accident lawyer for a referral to a divorce lawyer. When I arrived home, I removed all of the hyper-caffeinated evidence and destroyed it. My next act in this morality play, or melodrama, was to contact Helen, the divorced mother of Tommy's fiancée, who was also his employer. I traveled to the sporting goods store she owned and took her out for coffee, where I brought her up to date on Tommy's extracurricular activities. Ever since I was 12 years old, I've been obsessed with women's boobs. Helen's were abundant, and her face was angelic. I didn't understand why her husband would have cheated on her. We hit it off. It turned out that we were both training for the 5-borough bike tour of New York. We decided to train together on Sundays. Helen was 12 years younger than I was, but commented on what good shape I was in. I thanked her, and I said that all the exercise equipment that her store sold made it clear why she, too, was in great shape. We had a lot in common since both of our spouses cheated on us, and we were workout fanatics. She was only divorced for 6 months, and I soon would be joining that club that no one looks forward to joining. She touched my arm with her hand, and the pain from my wife's cheating receded from my mind. Alexa had stopped loving me or being intimate with me months ago, and suddenly I felt free, alive again, and aroused. We walked back to her store where I wanted to buy something to store my weights on. I couldn't stop looking at her black tights and low-cut black skin. Tight top. She stood next to some barbells, affixed to a wall. I reverted to my junior high school persona, and without thinking I blurted out, "That's a great rack." She pointed to the weight rack and then her chest. "Which ones did you mean?" I should have been ashamed, or at least embarrassed. But she did have a great rack. And why was it wrong to say it out loud? I said nothing. Helen laughed as she took my hand and placed it on her large chest. "And they're all natural," she explained. In that moment, I realized that my wife had been correct. Our lives didn't have to be that boring just because we were married since forever. I began to suspect that life after divorce might not be all pain and suffering. Tommy was out of a job and out on his ass with minutes. An hour later, his fiancée broke up with him. I filed for divorce and saw my wife only once more in a courtroom. She never apologized or asked for forgiveness. Instead, she continued to pursue Tommy, but with no luck. Since we earned almost the same, she was not awarded alimony. We split our assets and moved on. Once the divorce decree was final, and I didn't have to pay alimony, I finished my revenge. I didn't waste time talking to HR at my wife's college. I went straight to the president, who I'd met over the years at parties and events, and explained the who, what, when, and why. As a licensed psychologist, Alexa had a fiduciary duty not to sleep with her patients. Tommy was one of her patients. Alexa had crossed the line, and the president had no choice but to remove her, but he gave her the choice to resign, which she took. She went back to court to renegotiate our settlement because she was unemployed. Since she had voluntarily resigned, her petition was thrown out. I made sure that she lost her license to be a psychologist because of her unethical behavior as my final knife in her back. Or so I thought. I spent $1, $200 to find her old college boyfriend, Billy, the love of her life. I discovered that he was a bald 300 lb short-order cook in Long Beach, California, at a rundown diner next to Long Beach College. When she fell in love with him, he looked like Han Solo. Now he looked like Jabba the Hutt. I paid him $2,500 plus travel expenses to come to our city and confess his undying love for Alexa. I expected Alexa to recoil in horror. She gave me the shock of my life when she threw her arms around him and professed her continued everlasting love for him. The last I heard, she works as a waitress at Billy's Diner, and they share a small one-bedroom apartment above a garage, which is a far cry from the 30,000 FT house she lost in the divorce. She's happy, and I suppose everything worked out for her after all. The diner is next to a college, and she often picks up students, which Billy doesn't seem to mind because he has a 300 LB waitress girlfriend on the side. In a turn of events that only happens in a bad novel or a good life, I'm living with Helen Tommy's former boss, the divorced mother of his ex-fiancée. So, in some twisted, macabre way, Alex's cheating worked out for both of us. Frankly, I'm too happy with my wife Helen and our newborn baby boy to remain upset with Alexa or even think about her. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.